Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2025 Directors Closeup Spirit Awards edition. I am Maria Raquel Bozzi, Senior Director of Education and International Programs at Film Independent. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank all the partners that make Film Independent's important work possible. Thank you to this year's supporters of the Directors Closeup, the Directors Guild of America, IMDb Pro, and SAG Indie. And thank you to our 2025 Film Independent Spirit Awards supporters, Premier Partner Lacorazza, Principal Partner IMDb Pro, and official partners Bullet Frontier Whiskey, Fiji Water, and Mirabal. We appreciate your support of the independent film community. Today, we are really excited to continue this series with the nominees of the Best First Feature category. And this is one of my favorite panels because I find the lessons learned are still fresh in the filmmaker's mind, maybe even their skin. So I am very eager to hear directly from all of you about your experience and creative process making these beautiful movies. Here with us are Annie Baker, director of Janet Planet. Hi, Annie. Where are you? Great to see you. Alessandra Lacorazza Samudio, director of In the Summers. Hi, Alessandra. Welcome. Next up, we have Julio Torres, director of Problemista. And this is his second appearance this week. He's nominated for a series as well. Next up, we have Sean Wang, director of Didi. Hello, Sean. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Malcolm Washington, director of The Piano Lesson. Hi, Malcolm. Great to see you. Welcome to all of you and congratulations on your beautiful movies. Our moderator today is longtime friend of Film Independent, an Emmy Award-winning film and TV producer, the wonderful Shelby Stone. Hi, Shelby. Great to see you. Thank you for doing this one more time. You're the best moderator for this. She always chooses this category. It's her favorite category as well. So thank you so much, Shelby, and take it away. Have fun.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be here. It's such a pleasure to be asked to do this again. And we have such an extraordinary collection of first-time filmmakers this year. I cannot tell you how excited I am. I know you guys may have questions in the audience. You can put them all in the chat and the Zoom. And when we get to the Q&A part, I will go through the questions and I will ask them. So don't worry about that. In the meantime, I wanted to just do a quick introduction to all of these amazing filmmakers. Sean Wang did the most extraordinary movie called Didi, which is an exploration of a young Asian teen as his kind of trying to find his footing, which is always tricky in teen life, and navigating his parents and their different generation and expectations. Janet Planet, in a different way, explores that dynamic with a young woman, a young girl, and it was so moving to me because I think I've been there and done that somewhere in my distant past. Same within the Summers, which really moved me tremendously. And I'm so excited that the audience has gotten to see all of these movies. Problemista gave me a bit of a rash because I used to work for a producer exactly like the Tilda Swinton character. And it reminded me so much of that. Really beautiful film. And then I don't even know, from the most iconic playwright, beloved playwright, August Wilson, Malcolm Washington decides to tackle this icon and tell this beautiful story in The Piano Lesson about siblings and generational trauma and the different perspectives of how we deal with that as not just my community, which is the African American community, but in all communities, this sort of universal idea of siblings and different perspectives that they carry. So I would love to start by asking each of you to just, you can talk also to each other, but to just explain like a little bit of who you are and what made you feel that this story was something that you wanted to jump into the fire with. And just start, let's start there, and then we'll talk about the journey of trying to get it made. So I'm going to just pick people. I'm going to say, Alessandra, do you want to start within the summers?
Sure. In terms of why I chose to do in the summers, I think it's the idea that I had. It's a little bit semi-autobiographical based on my experiences with my sister. And one day I was just talking to my sister and we were just recounting the different summers that we spent with my father. And that just struck me as an interesting structure for the film. And so that was the first seed that I had. And I had never written a feature before, didn't really know what I was doing, but I had this structure in mind. And then I just kind of plowed forward by instinct, by trial and error, trying to write the script, which was the first hurdle. And then getting it done was, I'm sure everyone could relate, it was really hard. It was really hard to get the financing, to get actors, in order to secure financing and get producers. But it was beautiful, and I learned so much in the making of it. Yeah.
Quickly, you know, the way you unfolded this story moved me to tears, because it's such a specific and yet universal idea about, again, this running theme here this year about siblings and the different way that the same event can happen and different people who are related see and feel differently about it. And I would love for you to just, I understand it's semi-autobiographical, but like, what did you want? I mean, I know what I took from it, but what did you want to say about that dynamic, about divorce and siblings?
I mean, for me, I have a sister, obviously. And I think that having someone witness your trauma and witness your relationship with your father is such a powerful thing, because no one else but a sibling can see all those like small moments that end up building to so much of your life and having such a deep impact. And it's a fraught relationship in a lot of ways, because you're set, there's dynamics that your parents put you that pit you against each other. So you're almost like, not only you're almost enemies at points, and you're having to navigate, you grow up in the same household, but you're treated differently. You can be the smart one, you can be the pretty one, you can be the whatever, and you get respected and treated differently, and that allows for a different childhood. And so I just wanted to show how difficult those relationships are, but how important they are, and how they can really kind of help heal you in the end by continuing to have that that person that gets to witness it with you.
Great, great. We'll get back to the challenge of getting it made. We'll get back to that with everybody. Sean, I'd love to hear about what made you feel like you wanted to tell Didi now as your first film?
Yeah, well, it's really cool to be on this panel with all these filmmakers. Alessandra and I we were at Sundance together like
Nice.
a year ago, so I think we did a panel there. So it's really cool to also just like kind of see the circle that our films took. But I think with Didi, it was sort of like I think the seed of the idea really was, what if you took a movie like Stand By Me, which I love. I think it's one of the, seminal movies about childhood and adolescence that, doesn't pander to kids and boyhood, and just take that, but set it in a place that I know and had it star kids who looked and talked and felt like kids that I grew up with, which was, I grew up in the Bay Area in a very multicultural community, and sort of write hyper specifically to those characters, their backgrounds, their cultural heritage, and just see what that does to the story. And I think there was something really rich there that I was like, okay, there's something here, something that feels specific in its time and setting and characters. But I think it wasn't until I was like, oh, this is a mother-son story. encased in the trappings of a coming of age story like Stand By Me. That's when it really became alive to me. And that's kind of where the title stems from too, because Didi means little brother in Mandarin, but it's also a very endearing term that, you know, a lot of Chinese mothers call their younger sons. And, you know, in the movie, it's what his grandma calls the main character. It's what, the only people who call him that in the movie is his grandma and his mom. And then you know, in the other parts of his life, he's Chris or he's Wang Wang. And so that's when I was like, oh, this feels personal and specific. And I think, you know, it began as a, oh, you know, what, like more super bad Stand By Me coded. And then also, you know, to Alessandra's point too, it is semi-autobiographical. It's very much a fictional movie, but I think I've always been really drawn to directors who kind of take something that is lived in and true, but then spin it into something that is fictional. You know, like Mike Mills is one of my favorite filmmakers, and I think all of his movies, with the exception of maybe Thumbsucker, is sort of like starting from a place of truth, but then, you know, you watch the movies and they just feel so specific, but and fictional. You know, it doesn't just feel like a retelling of their life. And so I also didn't want to write a movie that I didn't feel like I could feasibly make. And so I think it was all of those things from a creative standpoint, from a personal exploration standpoint about adolescence, but also a logistical standpoint. Like I didn't want to get to a point as a filmmaker where, okay, I'm ready for this feature to be made, but then all of a sudden it's like this huge budget and I couldn't get it made. You know, it was designed to be small enough and sort of homegrown and intimate. And like I felt pretty confident that we could, you know, having never made a movie before, I felt sort of confident that like if you like this script, you're not going to go find another director to, you know, make it. I'm the perfect director for it.
That's very smart. That's great advice actually to the audience, because that is exactly the great fear. Thank you for that. Annie, do you want to talk about your wonderful film Janet Planet with one of my favorite unsung actresses?
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you guys talk. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. For me, it wasn't the first script I'd ever written, but it was the first one I'd ever wanted to direct. And so it was a really visceral thing. And was actually almost like I'd written some screenplays for hire. I'd written stuff on spec just maybe for myself to direct, but reaching the end of it, realized I didn't want to for some reason. And this one was kind of a thought experiment of like, and it sounds so, now that I've written this way, it feels so weird that I ever wrote any other way screenplays, but I was just like, I think I had a kind of anxiety earlier in my screenwriting career about exactly what we were just talking about. It's someone else directing it or other people reading it, and in some way was almost unconsciously writing for a reader or a different director or a producer. And of course that led to terrible writing that I didn't like. And so, and you get so much advice too about like how to write stuff that people will want to read, you know, which is always terrible. And this was like, okay, what if I just sit on my couch when I had just had a baby, like while my baby's napping, and I just write what I'm picturing in my head, like just try dreaming on a movie I'd want to direct and transcribe from my imagination. Which is now how I'll write any movie in the future for myself to direct. But sadly, it took me a really long time to almost be willing to do that and to kind of live in the unknown that way. And I had been doing that as a playwright, but somehow hadn't been able to do it as a screenwriter. So for me, it was less idea driven or story driven and more like more just kind of free associative visualizing that then led me to the story. I always have to like put it in quotes or something. Story that I wanted to tell. Yeah.
Interesting. And Julio, I'd love you to talk about Problemista and what made you want to make that your first feature.
I didn't know it was going to be my first feature when I was writing it. I I wasn't meant to direct it. And I knew that I wanted to direct at some point in my life, but I felt like I wasn't ready. So, and I didn't even like consider it till pretty late. And I came to filmmaking from a very different background, which is the stand-up comedian to TV writer to this, which there's a lot of good and bad in that. I feel like I was definitely, because of my professional experience thus far, had very unburdened by, is this movie going to be possible to direct? Because it's like you write and you're thinking, well, that's not my problem. And so I feel like I really allowed it to be on the page whatever I wanted to, in a way that it's a very, like, in retrospect, I was like, that's a crazy first movie. Because it's like so, it's just so much, and it's like sort of like, I don't know, and but to I don't regret it, but I definitely feel like it's an odd first movie. I also feel like I mean, it's also like, it sounds like most people's movies here, it's like very semi-autobiographical, which is something that I was very allergic to doing. I did not want to do that. It felt like too easy or too like boring or something. I've always been more interested in the fantastical and in like the minds of people that aren't me. But then it was when I was writing it and I realized that I could tell this very personal story in a way that is a little off-center and is a little fantastical, and that I could really, and then like once I started writing Tilda's character, that was like really fun. And so that became like my entry point into doing this, because I felt like if I write something that is so not related to my like personhood at all, then it's just like that will never get made. Because like the reason people want to work with me is this idea that we want your story. So this is how I was able to do it in a way that felt true to who I am, not just my biography.
Okay, that makes sense. Then Malcolm, I'd love for you to talk about, it's like so much to talk about Piano Lesson, but you know, what made you want to make this your first feature? Like, how did you come to this? What was your driving force here?
You know, I didn't really think of it in those terms. When I first, obviously, as you know, August Wilson is a giant in our culture. You know, we're a culture that's like proud of our heroes. You know what I mean? And we hold them up to the highest standard. And give them the reverence that they deserve when others won't. You know, so he was somebody that was always kind of like a looming uncle. You know, you kind of know their work, but maybe you're too young or you don't feel like connected to it. Maybe you feel like, oh, that's like for my parents' generation or so on and so forth. But when I was when it was like lockdown COVID, I had read Piano Lesson for the first time. And it was in a time where it was like a very kind of contemplative period for so much of us, you know? And I was doing my family tree and all these things. And I was trying to understand myself in the context of my ancestors and understand, you know, who they were and how that, you know, can kind of inform the decisions I make and what lives in me, good, bad, like all the full spectrum of things. So when I read Piano Lesson, it was a play that kind of wrestled with those themes like directly. And it was like, oh no, you gotta like lock into this. You know, there's something here that you have to really dig into, and engage these ideas for yourself, like even outside of filmmaking or writing, just for your life, you know, like consider these things. It's like I turned 30 also. That was like a shift, you know? And so it was just kind of like a call to like, hey, like consider those that came before you, like acknowledge them in some way. And ultimately that journey and that excavation of those people's stories turned into me making the movie.
I would love just for a second, if you would elaborate a little about, this is a movie you made with siblings, that's also about siblings. And if you talk about that a little bit, how did that, along with the magnitude of August Wilson and the ancestors, how did it feel to you? Sorry if I'm getting personal, but how did that feel to you to have to create that, as because that's a central part of this story too?
Totally. For one, getting an opportunity to make a movie is like such a privilege, and it's one not to take lightly. You know, it's something that I'm like, I think movies are sacred. You know, I like grew up in that kind of space where it's like that kind of important. And if you don't have something to say, if you don't have something to offer, if you're not willing to like put yourself on the line for it, you just shouldn't do it. Because also it's like it's a challenging thing to do if you don't care about it. You know what I mean? And I really cared. So with this film, it was kind of the thing of like the work started imitating the process, you know, like the content started imitating the process where, like I said, it started from such a personal place of me kind of, it wasn't about, when I came in, it wasn't like about me, Malcolm. It was like kind of just this larger thing of like the conditions of a people and like what does that turn into over time. So obviously August Wilson's concerned with um Black life through time and space and Black family and what the conditions of a country kind of how that impacts the people. And when you were telling that kind of story, you want the conditions of the set to mirror that, right? To like build imbue everything with meaning and power and purpose. And working with not only my born family, but people that whose work I've admired, like Samuel Jackson's characters have raised me in so many ways. You know, Danielle Deadweiler's like a sister to me in her work and now in real life. And I really wanted to make an environment that was like so much that like this is a family working out their things, you know, trying to put their lives in context, and deliver, you know, what they think the family needs. And having my siblings around, having my parents around, having my grandparents and great parents adorn the piano and the set that embodies it, everything became an altar and it became charged with that kind of energy. And what we were trying to do was like make something for this culture, for these people, you know, not necessarily thinking much further beyond that. But I'm glad that the movie went further than that.
I think that's great. That's great. And then I think it would be really interesting, especially for the audience, to hear from each of you, because you know, making any movie is not easy. Making your first film is really brutal, right? It can be. Both in terms of finding the money, getting your cast. I'd love you to kind of talk about that journey, finding the money, getting the cast, or getting the cast and finding the money, and then just the process of being on set. What's that like for your first film? And I'll just start with somebody, and then everybody can, you know, I'll just go through. Julio, do you want to start?
Sure. You know, I'm learning through this panel that I really go into things blindly. And there's sort of like it's almost like I enter things, it's like, you know, that tarot card, the Fool.
Yes.
I feel that's what I feel like. I'm just like la la. Like I'm like designing furniture now, and I'm like, I don't know how it's gonna get made, but but I will say that, you know, it's funny because it's like when I wrote the script, and A24 read it, and then they like gave it the green light, and I remember being told about that like it was like tectonically good news. And I'm like, wait, I wasn't aware that this movie had a chance of not being made. It was like, what do you mean? Like, I wrote the whole thing. Like, what else were they gonna do with it? But I do think that like a big thing for this movie to get off the ground was Tilda Swinton's support. And you know, when I talked to other filmmakers who worked with her, time and time again, she has this pattern of being the first person to raise her hand and attach herself to something, regardless of whether they're like a famous director or a first-time director. And she's really interested in entering spaces that she thinks will be interesting and fun, regardless of the prestige or success that those might bring, which is like, I mean, that's a true artist, really. That's like,
Yeah.
I feel like we're all compatible in that way, that we're like telling stories that we're interested in and not necessarily carving the roadmap to whatever we think success is going to be. But yeah, no, I feel like even though it's my first, even though it's like the first thing I've ever directed, because I had been working as a writer for a while, and developing a voice there, I think I had a very, very privileged to have had a robust ecosystem around me that made the movie possible.
That's great. That's really important, I think, you know, and that's rare. And I think that's something to celebrate, because each of you got to where you are on this screen, in this panel, in different ways. And all of those ways, I think, are good for people to hear. And I love your reference to the tarot card. That's really hilarious. So I don't know, Annie, do you want to talk about, because you also were a writer and established as a writer and then made this big transition.
I mean, I really identify with being the fool too. That was so beautiful the way you put it. I mean, like really early on, I realized how important it was for me to admit when I had no idea what anybody was talking about, and just like acronyms even that they use on, like, I didn't know what 10-1 was, you know, just that's what it is, right? Like there was just stuff where I was like, maybe that's a complicated like camera lens thing that I'm just not. And then I was like, just ask, like just be a clown and ask. And it meant you had to pee. So yeah, I just learned time and time again to just be, but it was so good for me in so many ways after like kind of becoming established in another world, like as a writer and a playwright, and being more in the theater world for the first half of my career, to be, I mean, I love movies. I've always watched movies. They were actually my first passion, but I had been on a set so little, and just learned things so fast. And it doesn't matter how, like I read so many books on editing and cinematography, and it doesn't matter, like all of it, it just kind of like, I learned more in my first 4 hours directing Janet Planet than I did, you know, in the entire year of like talking to people and reading books ahead of time. Like it's one of those mediums, and film sets can be really brutal and so beautiful, and you also just like understand what the set decorator does so quickly when you watch her do it. Like you're like, oh my God, you're so important. I see, you know, I had a first AD I really loved, and we talked for 6 months leading up to the shoot, but I like didn't totally understand what she was gonna do. Like I kept being like, yeah, so wait, what do you do again? And I mean, I knew like they were in charge of the schedule and everything, but then the first hour of shooting, I was like, oh my God, this person is like so unbelievably important, and she and I have to be one unit, and she's amazing. And I just completely understood the importance of every job and exactly what that person did firsthand on the first day of shooting. And I just had to come to accept that, like, the first 3 days, the scenes I shot those first 3 days were my weakest work. And of course I'd never made a movie before, but also like how painful to like watch dailies where you can like see yourself as a director learning on the job, you know? And like I'm so grateful for it. And it was humiliating. And I never have to do it again. I mean, not make a movie, but like be like a first-time film director, like wearing a baseball cap on your first day of set and like shaking people's hands. That was really scary.
Cool. That's great. Sean, do you want to talk about Didi?
Yeah, well, I think to echo Julio and Annie, I mean, Annie, both of your movies are so confident to think that, you know, you felt any sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing is so, you know, it's always both refreshing to hear and also like you see the final thing and it's just so put together and thoughtful. I feel like, you know, the common theme here almost is like I look back and I like think about how little I knew about anything, you know, not just shooting the movie, but putting it together. I didn't know, like, I think if I knew that casting was such a big piece of the puzzle to getting a movie made, I maybe wouldn't have written a movie that starred like 95% 13-year-old, like not white kids who couldn't lead a movie, you know, have like a bankable star. Which, you know, we got to work with Joan Chen, who's incredible and a legend, but we actually got the movie financed before she was even attached. And I think, again, we kept our movie small and intimate enough where I think like it was just small enough that it wasn't contingent on a piece of casting. But I think if you told me, you know, 6 years ago that it was like most movies get made when, you know, a Tilda Swinton, you know, raises her hand and, you know, attaches herself, I would be like, oh, I should probably write a bigger role for, you know, someone who can attach themselves. But I think it was that too, you know, I think my whole ethos with this movie was that I think you know, I think a lot of coming of age movies, which I think our movie kind of falls under the umbrella of, a lot of times their log lines are really generic, you know, they're always, you know, sort of a 13-year-old, a 17-year-old, a young person in a place. And they're, but then you go into the worlds of the movie, you know, I think, you know, Annie's movie and Alessandra's movie and our movie, you know, they share some, you know, they're all about young people, but they're such different movies. And I think what I love about that genre, I guess, is that it's all the little details and the sound and the setting and the tone and the world. It's all the details that add up that make it something different, that make it not about like a boy or girl, but like this boy or girl. And so that was kind of um the hope I wanted to bring into the movie and the ethos, which was like, I think the things that I don't know about this movie are actually the things that are gonna give it that sort of spin that hopefully, you know, there's a lot of tropes in this genre, but hopefully we can subvert them, or like if most movies go right, we'll try and go left. And I think that went back to just like you know, our casting directors had never casted a movie before, and they found a bunch, like 95% first-time non-actors from middle schools and basketball camps and skate parks. You know, two of my producers had never produced a movie before, but it was just sort of, I think, trusting that feeling of like, I don't know if we're doing this the right way, but it feels good to us. And I think if it feels good to us, then like we're gonna hopefully make something that feels more specific and unique, as opposed to something that feels a little bit more lukewarm and that has sort of had been done before. And so I think, again, I like, you know, I had never I was a total nobody, you know, I didn't come up through stand up the way Julio did. Like I didn't have any sort of audience. So I was kind of like, we should just try and take all the swings possible to make this feel unique. Because if it's a 3-star lukewarm movie, no one's going to see it anyway. So I'd rather like take a swing and try to make a, you know, what in my head, like a 5-star movie. And it's like, cast my grandma, you know, go take the risky route and try to make something more, you know, unique, as opposed to taking the safe route and making something that people probably wouldn't go see. And so I think that was kind of the ethos that drove us, which again was sort of like, let's lean on the sort of naivete that we don't know the things. And, obviously there were growing pains because of that also, but I think we just sort of trusted the chaos of the process. And luckily, we had financiers, we had we didn't have a studio until we sold the movie at Sundance to Focus Features, who are amazing and lovely, but we had a team of financiers who I think trusted that version of the vision where sort of the idea that this was going to be 95% discovery actors with, kids who had never been on screen before. That was going to be part of the charm and the appeal of this movie, that it's going to feel like a world that's so specific and new, that it'll, on paper, maybe seem like, again, the log line, maybe you've seen a version of this movie before, but once you kind of go into the world, you're kind of in a very, very fresh air. So that was the hope. And again, very fortunate that we had financiers who believed in that and let us make the movie we wanted to make the way that we wanted to make it.
That's such a gift. And you can really tell while watching the movie, like you really get. I went to college in the Bay Area. Well, actually, almost everyone in the family went to the college in the Bay Area, and I have a lot of friends in the Bay Area. And even though, it's a community we don't spend enough time with on film or television, and I loved both the universality and the specificity that you found. And I'm so glad, it's so great that you found people, financiers especially, who were in sync with what you wanted to do. You really did a great job. So congratulations. You're here. All of you are here. So congratulations to all of you for that. I don't know, Malcolm, do you want to talk about the process of being a first-time director? And I know this is Netflix, so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was interesting. It was very scary. It's very scary going to work with a big company like Netflix, especially when everything I'd done before this was really like short film, music video, like really kind of, you're so in control of everything. And working with Netflix was coming into I remember like they controlled the material. They controlled August Wilson's the Century Cycle, so they have the rights to all of them. So I remember I was like going into the big office, knocking on the door, not only trying to pitch myself to make this film, but just to show them that, hey, this is a really cool idea that you guys have already. Like, you guys have this, and it's like, it's dope. Like, we can put a team behind it. We can make it like this and make this really exciting thing that can connect with newer audiences than these have connected with before. Like, so it was scary, but then once you get kind of working with them, I remember I went to film school, and sometimes in film school, there's a kind of weird energy with studios when you're like, oh, the studio's you just hear all the horror stories. They're gonna take your film away. They're gonna like make you cast a bunch of people you don't want to cast, or and when I got there, I realized, wait, these are a bunch of really smart people who have done this for a long time, that have good taste and want to do something interesting. Like, everybody goes to work wanting to make something good. Like, nobody wants to do bad work at work. And they put my kind of anxiety at ease, and they were a really great partner to kind of navigate the whole thing with it. I haven't obviously made any movies before as a director, but this was something I've been really working towards for a long time. So I was kind of like navigating the filmmaking process on this one with a lot of insight from just friends and people I know that have made movies, and I carried all of that. But it was actually a really nice experience working with Netflix. So shout out to Netflix.
Cool. Alessandra, do you want to talk about In the Summers and that journey for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as everyone said, there's like a beauty to inexperience. Because I think it allows you a lot of flexibility. Because as I was writing it, of course, I wanted to direct it, but I did not think about any of the budget. I didn't think about how difficult this would be as a first film. Like, you know, everyone's like, don't work with kids, you know, don't have your story be told in one specific moment, you know, maybe don't have a car accident. Like there's just so many things that I just didn't know that maybe were going to be complicated to pull off. And so as I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about the director self or being in the editing room. I was just thinking about writing the story. And I think that's, you know, having a strong script to then have producers that really believe in you, like that really is step one. Without that, I don't think this would have never happened, you know, first time filmmaker, really no experience whatsoever. I did like one short before and, you know, came up in editing. So without that strong script, I don't think anyone would have signed on to it. And I met one of my lead producers doing a lab with WGA East and Film Nation, and Alex Dinelaris. I sent him the script to kind of get feedback, and I was hoping he was going to destroy it and tell me how bad it was and all this stuff. And he loved it. And from then on, he's the one that kind of like got all the producers together. And it was a ton of producers. It took a lot of effort to get this made, a lot of people's first time as well, which I think was an asset for this film because again, we didn't know what we were up against. And I think we got the green light, like the official kind of green light on it, like the weekend before we started pre-production. Like before that, it was just like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And it just, every step of the way, it felt like this could fall apart at any moment. And there's something about just that keeps you on your toes and you're just kind of being in the moment and thinking about it. And like, you know, as I came to set, the first day was so scary. I could only think about that first day. Couldn't tell you what I was shooting the next day. And then after that first week, you're like, I survived a war, but you realize it's not a war, it's a battle. And like, you have a lot more weeks left. And so, but each week you grow a little bit more confident, but that fear at the beginning to tackle is like a really big thing. And you have such imposter syndrome, or at least I did. And you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I bet, you know, and the benefit is like you hire people that are better than you, that are more talented than you, that can guide you, you know, your cinematographer, your production designer, people that know what they're doing, were really beautiful and can bring good ideas and help elevate your work. But I would have never had a scene in Cars had I known how difficult it is to shoot with cars, like nightmare. And then the casting, of course, you know, I wanted to cast a Latin American as the dad. For me, that was very important for him not to be Spanish, but Latin American. And the pool of bankable Latin American stars is small, is very small, unfortunately still. And Renee, for people that don't know, Residente is a very, very popular. Yeah, he's awesome.
Oh my God.
He's he's the best. But I grew up with him. My sisters were like obsessed with him. He was like, you know, the number one like crush my sister had growing up. And when we went out to him, I think he only agreed to do it because he thought the film would never get made. And so, and that's the only reason we got to make the film. And then he, like a few, you know, right before we were shooting, he's like, oh shit, okay, so I'm going to do this. And he had never really acted before. So I think it's also people believing in that script and trying to stand with you that helps you get something made.
That's hilarious. And he's brilliant in the film. Like he's brilliant. That's so funny. Well, I'm so glad you got him and I'm so glad it worked. So before we get into the Q&A portion, you know, generally you guys have touched, I mean, this is such a big topic, but to try to cover, but you know, I'd love to know from each of you, I love how honest everyone's being. It is terrifying. You know, I remember the first movie I was the producer on. It was terrifying, right? And I love how honest everyone's being about that. But if there was one big piece of advice that you could give to just the audience in general about making your first film, whatever that is, would love to kind of have each of you talk about, now that you've done it, from retrospect, it doesn't have to be one, it can be, what are the things that you feel like people should kind of know going in? Because clearly Annie was hilarious about having read the books and done all the thing and then finding yourself going, oh shit, like here we are. So Annie, do you want to say like what you think?
I got one.
Sure.
I think you should start as soon as possible. Just start. Like get over the like wall of fear that you put up behind all the reasons why you're not ready or why you don't have this kind of support or you don't. Just start. Just start.
Mine is that, and I think this is maybe like the only thing I did right. I did like 10 million things wrong, but I I felt like the mistakes, the things that about the movie that don't work are my fault, and the things that, like, oh, how do I put this? It's like people are going to give you so much advice and you're going to get so many feedback. You're going to get so much feedback like in prep, pre-prep, on the dailies. And I realized very quickly that like, and of course, when someone gives you a note that you want, you take it. And I also had amazing people working with me, amazing editor, DP, who I listened to so closely. So it's not about disregarding the opinions of your closest collaborators or anything like that. But I feel like have your mistakes be your own. And the worst things in my career have been times when I did something I didn't want to do or didn't do something I wanted to do because I took advice from somebody who I just thought knew better than me. And I feel like it's so important to me that the things that I don't like about the movie are my mistakes. And the things that I do love about the movie are my weird idea that everyone was like, that's a bad idea, don't do it. And I was like, we gotta do it. You know, it's like that I actually was on the hook. Because it is such a hard experience. And I would just say that to first-time filmmakers. And I have so many students who are young writers too, who are so anxious and want to do right. And if you give them a note, they'll just take it and like go too far with it. And I feel like it's so dangerous when you're directing your first movie, especially if it's when you wrote, to maybe take advice that is for a different movie. You know, don't make it sound so cheesy, but it's like make your movie that has all of your stupidity in it and your genius in it. You know, it's like that in retrospect, I'm glad I did all of my stupidity. Yeah.
Julio?
I would say surround yourself with people who really believe in your idea and who will be like good allies to you. And the trust that and the will fill in the blanks that you don't know. Like I never directed anything, like not even like a short or anything. And I was very aware of that. I was like very, very, very aware of that. And I'd also like, you know, I didn't go to film school or anything, but it's the fact that I had producers who were very, very as into this idea as I was, that really, really made it possible. And I think that like be okay with not knowing things and like asking questions and just trust that like it is okay to learn on the job. And you know, to echo what Malcolm was saying, I think that too many people like spend years doing the like can I take you out for coffee and pick your brain, and it's like stop taking people out for coffee. just just do the thing.
That's great. And to that end, I'll get to Sean and Alessandra, but what I love is the barrier to entry to making projects is very low. You can make a short every weekend if you want with just an iPhone. I'm not recommending it, but you can actually practice your craft by making as many shorts as you want. And Lena Waite and Justin Hillian told me this story years ago. They met in a writing group And they just formed this collective of people who are like-minded and did shorts on the weekend and proofed each other's scripts. And so that it didn't feel like such a huge barrier, because, you know, it feels like, oh my God, I have to write a script and it has to be great. And then I have to get other people to approve and I have to find money. And oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I love what you're saying, because it is sort of like Nike logo of just do it, but you can actually do it. It used to be very hard in 16 millimeter or 35, but you can kind of jump into the deep end, which is what Julio and Malca, you know, everybody's basically
But in a
saying.
bunch of different ways, it's like you can have friends come over and read, to have a little table read and hear what you wrote.
Yeah.
You know, you can like get into photography, like iPhone photography, and just like how would, you know, in this, if the moment that we're having right now is a scene, how would I shoot it? Where would I put the camera? And you can kind of like think through all of these things. Now it doesn't have to be a finished short that goes to festivals and all these things. It's like there's just a bunch of little things that to just keep your mind going and develop.
No, I love that. And you know, right now they're making phones that have really sophisticated sound and everything. You can just practice. Sorry, Julio, you were saying something.
No, it also just occurred to me to like lean into your strengths, or what it is you like about making movies. Like if you love dialogue, it's perfectly fine to make a movie that doesn't move a lot. You know what I mean? Or it's like if you have like an eye that it's like you're coming from almost like a photographer's background, it's okay to have a movie with very little dialogue that's very atmospheric. It's like, what is the best version of the thing that you can make, not what is going to be the best movie.
Got it. Alessandra?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what everyone has said. I think for me also, like Annie, like knowing when to trust your instinct was like really, really important, because you do get thrown a million things. So I think for me, it was like knowing exactly what I wanted the film to be. Like, you know, at the nutshell, like at the end, like what is this film? Because then every single decision stems from that like core, like what is this? What am I trying to say? Like who are these people? And like knowing that really, really well can kind of allow you to push back on something that you're getting a lot of pressure to say yes to, or to be able to hear an idea that's really good that maybe you didn't think of that can add to that. And then I think the other thing that I learned, or maybe was an asset for me, was actually coming from that editorial background. It's just some of the best training you can get as a filmmaker, because you really learn how juxtaposition tells a story and how things cut together. And I think that really allowed, where our day was running long and all of a sudden I needed to make my scene. So like, okay, what's the most effective way that I can cut, you know, what can I take out and still have the scene really like be what it is? And so I think that was a huge asset for me. And then in each phase, like when I was writing, I didn't think about the director self. I didn't think about myself in the editing room. When I was directing, I didn't think about what I wrote. I was just living in the moment and letting beautiful accidents happening and letting the actors kind of bring these characters to life. And then it becomes its own thing. And then in the editing room, I forgot about all of that and was just focusing on what I shot and what was in front of me, and not trying, you know, I cut a lot of the car scenes that were literally painstaking to do. And I, you know, I was like, that's got to go, because it doesn't work. It doesn't matter that you were sweating in 108-degree weather and you had whatever, you know, whatever it was. I was like, the scene's got to go. And I think it's just living in that moment and just being like, what do I have? What's the story that I'm making right now? Even it's not what you imagined as a writer, as a director. That
you need to make a Transformers movie next.
Yeah.
You just learned so much about cars. You need to overcome that fear.
I love that. Sean, did you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of echoing what everyone else has said. I think the only new thing I probably have to add is, I think, you know, I had made a lot of like short docs before this feature film, and I think going back to what you were saying, like it is, you know, all the docs I made were literally like, what do I have at my disposal? Can we get a crew of 3, 5, like whatever it is. Like the one that actually became sort of like almost proof of concept short for Didi was this short film that kind of took place in my middle school yearbook, and I just like all animated, and kind of that became our sort of like It was like released on the New York Times, and I think I guess three things. One is I would suggest if you're gonna direct a first time feature, make a short that doesn't even have to be related to your feature, but like make a short and edit it yourself, because I think to Annie's point, like I've directed a short where I cut that short myself, and I was just learning. I saw all of my mistakes, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't talk over all the dialogue that my actors are saying. That really fucked me later. And you just learn, through trial by fire. But I think the hardest thing I remember when pitching the film was so many times when you're a first time filmmaker, you are just a liability as an investment because you've never done it before. And you're really selling investors and studios, if you go that route, on like just passion, just sheer passion. And like why you're the filmmaker to tell that story. And I think what the short, it was called Hags Have a Good Summer, gave me was a data point. It was like it was a short film that took place in my middle school yearbook. It shares similar themes and similar characters to the feature. And you look at the comments on the New York Times, and it was like 60-year-old white men from Arkansas and like women from it was just sort of like, look, this film has an audience. It's not just like a little indie that's gonna find like an Asian. It's like it's a very, widespread. And I had a data point that I could point to, and all of a sudden it wasn't just like me trying to, you know, share my love and passion for the story. You need that, obviously. Um, and then I would say also like I see a lot of people, they call it like a jump from shorts to features. They always use that word like jump or leap. And I think I really just wanted to make the feature experience as close as possible to making the shorts. Obviously, it's there's more apparatus, there's financiers, there's a little bit more of a system, but it was much more important to me that kind of, so everyone else was saying, like to have allies in my corner as opposed to just hiring people off of a resume.
Mhm.
Most of our department heads, this was like one of their first feature films, and it was because I had a friendship with them beforehand, or I just met with them and I just like, it didn't matter that they didn't do a ton of features. I just like, I have a feeling that this collaboration is gonna work. Not based off of any sort of prior experience, but just based off of how I felt spending time with them and hanging out. And I knew that like, if we had creative, tension, and because of a passion, they were passionate about the idea, not because they were like, oh, but you're less experienced than me. And so, I would just say trust your friends, like if you've made stuff before, you have a network of friends. I see a lot of people make a feature and all of a sudden they're working with like different department heads, and they're just like, again, you want to surround yourself with people who are better than you, but you want to surround yourself with people who aren't going to undermine you, also who are going to sort of support your kind of what Annie was saying, your stupidity, and like allow your silliness to be on screen if that's what you want it to be. Let them support the version of the vision that you have, and not, the sort of committee version based off of experience.
No, that's very important, because it's so scary that if you feel like you don't have people in your corner with you who are in sync with you, it can be really undermining to your own self-confidence, which all of you talked about trusting your gut. At some point, you just have to go, this is who I am, and my gut is telling me X or Y or Z. We're about to get into the Q&A portion, and I see a bunch of questions. So one of the things I would love for each of you to talk about is, how did you sell yourself? You're writer, directors, but okay, it's your first film. Did you have to do a pitch deck? Did you just find people? Like, I saw your piece in the New York Times, Sean, and I was completely taken. So how is it? Through a short? Is it through the script and a short? Is it a pitch deck, or a not necessarily a pitch deck, a director's vision boards? Like, how did you, in each of your specific circumstances, what were the combination of things? And you sort of talked about this, but very super specifically and narrow, like what were the things you did so that your investors or your studio thought, okay, I'm going to roll the dice with this person and this material?
Was that a question for me,
It's
or was
for
that just
all
for
of you.
everyone?
It's for all of
Okay.
you. It's a question that's coming up in the Q&A questions from the audience. So I thought if you could just do that specific piece, that would be great.
Yeah, I made like so many things. I made like I made like pitch decks, I made lookbooks, and one of them, and this is stuff I wish people told me too. It's like I feel like just working through your ideas, like just writing through them. So like I wrote like my musings on Black American spiritual practice, like the Southern Christian church ideals and Western African spirituality. And because I knew that these were themes that were gonna kind of make the end of the film make sense. So I was like working through like hoodoo and voodoo and colonialism as told through spiritual practice. I was like writing about Afro surrealism. I was collecting images of the period that the film takes place in, and I was collecting images of photographers whose work inspires me, tonal things. I made like videos, like exercises in tone and music and all of these things to give not only the studio but to my department heads, like just to get everybody on the same page of, hey, this is what we're making. We're trying to push beyond the boundaries of what this thing has been before. And what does that look like exactly? Okay, it's Fela Kuti and Frank Ocean and 1930s Pittsburgh photography. It's like these things are going to swirl into a movie. It's like all your influences that make you and like what your voice is, finding a way to distill that into a text that somebody who doesn't know you at all can read it and be like, oh, I get what this person's like into. I get their vibe. I get what they're gonna do with the movie, because until you make a movie, you don't have, like Sean was talking about, you don't have anything that tells people who you are, like what your voice is. And I think that like that's the most important thing, is like finding your voice, articulating your voice, and communicating that to your people that you're working with. So I made a bunch of shit.
That's great. And do you think, Malcolm, that you maybe had to do even more of that because you were dealing with a studio? Or do you think you would have done that anyway?
That's like part of my process. Like I think putting things in a context, and like that's like how I work through what I think about something. It's like you go down, if somebody says, what do you think about like spiritual practice? If you might not know until somebody asks you, then you're like, I don't know. I grew up in the church, but I'm not really religious myself. And then you start writing that, and then that leads you to start reading stuff of like, what do I make of that? Like, what does make sense of this to me? And then that turns into a text, that turns into the scene that you're writing, that turns into all it just informs everything. Like, so for me, like, it's like a workspace. And like when we had a production office, when we were prepping, and it's like my whole wall was just like these ideas, just things. Like there's a theme in my film, Black American reclamation. What does that mean to you? Like, what does that mean? Practically, like, okay, the movie starts on 4th of July. There's a theft. Like my ideas of America is like centered on thief, on stealing things. It's like, okay, that's gonna be a major theme in the film. So and violence as like a language, like, okay, that's going to be a theme, you write those ideas out, and then that turns into the film. And a byproduct is pitching the studio and pitching the actors, but you're working these things out for yourself. You got to know, you have to be the holder of all those things.
I think that's great. I think that's really like a beautifully clear articulation of communicating what's your artistic intent and vision.
And that's just for me. Like everybody works totally different. Like this is just I'm not saying do this and you're gonna make a movie. I'm just like, this is what I did.
No, that's why each of you, we want to hear from each of you, because there is no right or wrong. It's just, how did you do it? And the people in the audience will either vibe or not vibe, but it's interesting to hear, right? Like it's really valuable to understand how other people approach this problem. Or how to communicate to investors or studios or actors or everybody what it is what you want to do, what the feeling, tone, and the meaning behind what you're trying to do. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Just give me that.
I think I'll just say something really quickly, which is, I would imagine all of us probably made lookbooks and decks. Like, I feel like that's just a necessary part of the package. But I think to what Julio was kind of saying earlier about like people wanted to work with him, and I think, and this is just my perspective, but I do think as a first-time filmmaker, and I think everybody kind of does this anyway now with the internet, but like you really have to be very self-aware of your own narrative as just a filmmaker and as like a person and how people are perceiving your work, um and I think the why you is such a big piece of the puzzle, especially as a first-time filmmaker. And I think it was like, for me, a lot of my short films just happened to explode. Like Didi is literally all of my short films smashed together, and that wasn't intentional. But it was like, oh, Didi has like also screen. There's a lot of screens in our movie because it takes place in the late 2000s and like the MySpace, Facebook aim of it all. And I had worked at this team at Google called Creative Lab for like 6 years, where that's what we were doing. And so it was like, how do you take all of this experience that you have and how does it translate to this story that you're telling? And I think if you can kind of weave that narrative for whoever is on the other side to be like, okay, we like your script, but can you pull this off? I think for our movie, I think with all my shorts and the experience that I had, if I then wrote this like giant sci-fi thing, I think people just wouldn't be able to connect the dots as to why I was like the right filmmaker for it. And so I think it is sort of just making sure you're aware of, how the other person you're talking to is like, okay, I can connect the dots and like I can understand how A, B, and C, gets you to D. And I think to, Julio's point has like he had such a voice as a stand-up and things that like it almost makes sense. You have to be like, okay, why do they want to work with me? Oh, it's because of the things that I've already made. Like I think unfortunately we do work in an industry that has, you need precedence for something to make the next thing. And so one thing I also, this might be a little inside baseball, but a lot of people make sizzle reels and a lot of people kind of, if you have your short film proof of concept, there was an exercise I did at the Sundance Directors Lab, which was called World of Your Film. And it basically was like, they were saying, at this point you have your script, you have your deck, you have a bunch of these things that communicate, the script, but make something, the assignment was like, make anything that just communicates more like the vision inside your head. It doesn't have to be a sizzle. It can be pictures, it can be audio, it can be it's not necessarily something an investor would see. It was just like get all of the inspirations in your head onto something, however you want to do it. And I did that, and it was something I think I'm going to do with every movie moving forward. It was sort of like it was like YouTube videos and old friend photos and like pictures in my yearbook. It was just all these things that didn't belong together, but it was like all the things that inspired the movie. And it was something that, our movie was already financed by the time I made that, but we showed it to the crew before day one of shooting. And it was just like a sort of it wasn't a sizzle. It was just like a solid burst of emotion. It was like in 4 minutes, it was like, this is the movie we're making, the tone, the music. And I think it just aligned everybody to be like, oh, that's the movie, like in its simplest form. And so that's something I think I'm going to do with every movie moving forward.
That's great. It's another really great idea.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, I see Julio, your wheels are turning.
I think that it should like it's so funny because it's like through hearing Sean, I was like, oh, actually no, this is good that was my first movie. Because of this idea that it's like, all right, the hook was like why do they want to work with you? And and I think I really think that I really don't think in taking a job unless you're the best person for that job. So I think that like first you have to like believe that and make sure that like you don't want to be a director out of vanity or out of things other than you think that this is like the best possible, that this will yield the best possible, most authentic result. And every step of the way, just remind people that you are the one that has the keys to this. And I think that like lookbooks and things like that, like, will show that you know this world better than anyone. So therefore it's futile to try and attach like a different director. And I think because I'm also in the movie, which was also, that was like part of the like unspoken agreement that I was going to be in the movie. But then when I was talking about being the director, I said like, well, I don't have to be in the movie. I would much rather like direct it than like be in it. Then I think that was like, oh, okay, so he actually really wants to direct. He's not just saying it. And I think it, and even like, I'm rambling, but like even like it's almost like you have to split the difference between humility and like know, and like saying when you don't know something, but also like be confident in what you do know, which is that this is your project.
Alessandra.
Yeah. I think I also did the lookbooks and the mood boards, and I think having a strong script was a big part of it. But in terms of selling it to financiers, like, I don't think it was me at all. I don't think it had anything to do with me in a certain sense. Like, I really think it was Alex Dinalaris, one of my main producers, believe it in me and his reputation that got the film made. So I think the fact that he believed that I could do it, then it forced other people to believe that I could do it. And I made it pretty clear to Alex that I would rather bury the script and have it never see the light of day than have someone else direct it. So I'm like, if you like the script, this is your only choice as a director. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I love the I have nothing to lose attitude, to be completely honest. Like that's like a good card to use, of being like, well, we could also just not make this movie.
But you know what I love is that you had a backup, meaning you had written something that was undeniably great and unique, right? Each of you wrote something that was truly stood out and had an articulation about a vision that was yours and yours alone. And I think that the burn it down thing is great when you have such a strong backup, you know? But you did it. You had it on paper, like it was clear what you were trying to say and do. Julio's laughing at me, but don't you think that's true? If you didn't have
No. I like that. Like, reading between the lines, what you're saying is, if your script is so, don't threaten with not doing it.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm simply speaking to the five of you, because the five of you are here because you put, it's not your money where your mouth is, but your soul and your artistic vision was a stopgap right there, right? Like, it's, you see who you are, you see what you're trying to do. And I think that that's amazing, because you do have to start with what's on the page. No matter what AI may or may not do, you have to start with how you read something and you go, oh, this is a person who has a really unique and strong ability to communicate about a story, and why this story becomes specific and yet universal, which is, I think, what we all have done. Yeah.
Can I ask Annie a question?
Sure.
Are you still out? Are you out the game?
No, ask me.
Loved Janet Planet. Incredible. And it felt like only you could. I wasn't familiar with your work before that, and from watching, I'm like, only you could have made that movie. And I don't know you at all. We're just meeting right now.
That's great.
So it's such a clear voice. But I have a question, because you're such an accomplished playwright. I'm curious, in turning your kind of attention to a film, like, what did that teach? How did your process change? What did that teach you about the medium of film and theater? Like, talk me through that kind of, those differences.
Yeah. I mean, it's so, yeah. And I feel like you must have learned so much adapting the piano lesson
You know-
too. Like,
You know what's funny is people ask me so much about turning plays into movies, and it's like I really don't know. Like I only know how to make movies, and that's why I'm
Yeah.
want to ask you because I'm like,
it's weird. I almost have the same response, except it's almost like if you were like, how do you, I mean, this sounds really stupid, but I actually feel this way. If you were like, how do you tell the difference between a song and a painting or something? I'm like, one is made of musical notes and the other is paint or something. Like, I don't, like,
yeah, they're like
I
totally
don't know how I
different.
feel about them. Like, I don't, it's almost like nothing's applicable. Like, I wish my strengths in one form could help the other. But it actually felt like, I think I used to as a playwright, like, it's weird because actually, like, I primarily wanted to be a filmmaker when I was younger. And that's sort of what I grew up loving, but ended up kind of in theater for various reasons and had a very like intuitive relationship to it. And I remember when I started writing screenplays, and actually for me, the parameters of the stage space were really helpful. Like just that you're trapped in a little box and there's only like, you can pretend you're a million different places, but there's only so many choices you can, yeah, there's something about the live experience that's like super constricted in a way that I think was good for me. And then I remember when I first started writing screenplays, I would be like, I'd be like interior house, and then they'd like be in the house, and then I'd be like exterior driveway. He gets in the car, and then be like interior car. It was funny because I always ended up writing car scenes. Be like interior car, they're in the car, and then I'd be like exterior. They pull up outside the like. I was like, I don't even know. Like, am I allowed?
Where can they go?
Where do they go? Like, there was something like I almost had to like let go of, there was something about the fact that in screenwriting or filmmaking, technically you could go anywhere or do anything. You could be like the top of the Eiffel Tower. Now we're underground. And like, you can do that in theater too, obviously, and you're just pretending, but there was something about screenwriting that really messed with my head. It was like I was too literal about it. And same with if there was a journey, if it was like someone was here and then they were in this other place, I thought you had to show them getting there or something.
I feel you. I feel you.
And
No, you can just start. They're sitting there already.
Walking into the room, like she exits the living room, and then I would be like, she enters the kitchen, and I think it took some like letting go of, maybe for me, it's all about letting, and I'm so curious if this happened to you, like adapting the piano lesson, like if you just have to kind of like let go of a literal way to do things eventually, which is not to say that you like everything's going to be crazy or something, but just that like, I don't know, for me in my writing process, it's always about like intuition. I mean, everyone has like used that word so many times for a reason, I think. Um, and that's why for me, when people talk about story, I get really clammed up or something. Cause when I think about like story, I think about people getting in cars and driving from like one building to another. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. But if I think of everything in terms of like, yeah, some sort of dream logic and intuition, then I kind of know where I want to be next. I don't know if that's really answering your question.
No, it did because it was like it was so cinematic in a different kind of way, like not in like if it, like just crudely thinking of like if I imagine what a playwright what their movie would be like, I would think of them like a Cassavetes style where everybody's talking,
I think what Julio said, where like I didn't write the good first movie. I'm like, oh, I totally didn't write the good first movie. Like the good first movie for me would have been people in one apartment all night long or something.
Yeah.
Like Mike Lee Abigail's Party or something. Like I was like, why didn't I do that? Just like, why didn't I'm a playwright. Like, why didn't I do like just a long
Nah, you a filmmaker. You a filmmaker.
But I think actually it is because the mediums are so different to me and mean meant such different things to me that I almost felt like it had like way too many locations. We didn't have enough money to get to all of them. Like it was so hard. It seems now in retrospect like a really stupid screenplay for your first movie to be. And then also I got to actually experiment with my visual imagination in a way I hadn't with theater before. I'm like really glad I didn't just shoot an argument Like,
That's such a beautiful way to
like-
put it. Your visual imagination.
But how exciting that maybe next time you'll marry those strengths. The
yeah,
new ones
no,
don't.
totally, yeah. And I'm curious for you guys, like all of you, I knew nothing about budgets writing my first screenplay. And so Janet Planet is just like a budget ignorant screenplay. And now I never stop thinking, like now the screenplay I wrote after, in a good way, I don't think a bad way. I didn't use it, I didn't creatively inhibit me, but I found it really interesting to be like, do I really want that to happen? Because that would be a week of shooting. Or do I want this other thing to happen? Like this happened to me in theater too. Like I like parameters and constrictions because they allow me to kind of think creatively. And so I've found it now writing my next movie for myself to direct really liberating to actually know a kind of how much things cost and how hard they'll be, and to like to either embrace it or find another way. And I'm curious now that you like have the knowledge or some amount of knowledge of like what's weirdly expensive and what's actually weirdly easy. Like I couldn't have predicted either for myself if that's affecting your writing process or your envisioning process for your next film.
I can jump in. I mean, I was sort of, I think you do I also was sort of like budget, had no idea how to break down a budget before this. And I was like, okay, Fruitvale Station, how much did that cost? They shot in the Bay Area. And I think budgets have changed over the last, few years. And I learned after we made our movie that every budget on the internet is a lie. And so I was kind of, being like, we can't make our movie for over this much. And then everybody was like, why? And I was like, I don't know. I just don't want to. But yeah, I don't know. I think I maybe this is something for the, filmmakers watching too, but I think it was definitely, one of the reasons I set the movie in my hometown was that I knew I had like shot a little short film there back in like 2016, and it was like the first thing we kickstarted a couple $1,000s, but that Kickstarter went like super locally viral, and everybody in the community was like, how can we help? Like they were like donating their homes, donating cars. They were just like trying to be a part of this thing. And I think you sort of forget that like in places that aren't filmmaking hubs, like having a film set there is magic. It's like, oh my God, people want to be a part of it. And so we really designed this to be sort of a communal movie and to shoot in places that I grew up going to and to kind of bring the local community into it. And even though like it was a little bit more expensive to shoot there practically, like on a budget level, the in-kind donations and resources and love from the community like brought our budget way down. And then same with cars. Cars are a huge pain in the ass. I like never want to shoot a car scene again. But also I think that was in pitching our movie too. This didn't end up working out, but I kept telling everybody we were pitching the movie to that because there was like 20 pages of our script that takes place on screens. I was like, those are days of, we can cut our shooting days down because we're not actually shooting 95 pages, we're shooting 70. We still shot for 25 days, so they didn't translate, but I think it got people excited to be like, oh yeah, like this is actually a good investment. But I think I always have my producer hat on in some capacity, just because I never want to write something I can't actually make.
I might be the opposite there, where I am just ignoring everything I learned about budgets and kind of just diving in. I think I'm writing a military story that is so different from anything I've ever written before, that it feels almost like a first film again, because I'm learning everything once again. And I think I just can't help myself but to get lost in what I'm doing and not. I think I'm too future, like present oriented. I don't really think about the future that much, which maybe is to my own detriment. Maybe it would be more helpful for me to be like, hey, that's maybe expensive, don't do that. But I'm not currently.
We're getting ready to wrap up because our time is running. So I just wondered if anybody had any kind of last comments you'd like to share or observations? Because I think this has been really invigorating for me as a filmmaker. And I have such respect for each of you and the movies you've made, and I'm so glad they got made and that I got to experience them. And I hope the audience out there feels exactly the same. And it's such a bonus because you're all been acknowledged as making wonderful first-time films. But if there's something you'd like to share on the way at the end of this with the audience, I would love to have you say it. We're running out of time, so the pithy version, but yeah. Anyone?
I just want to say thank you, Shelby, for moderating this. For all the panel or the people watching, Shelby is a day out from principal photography on a feature film that she's producing. So the fact that she's moderating this is kind of insane. I would be like throwing up and crying right now if I was a day out. So Shelby, you look very put together, and thank you for taking the time to do this. We appreciate it.
You are very kind, Sean. Thank you. I wouldn't miss this for the world. I'm always so grateful to Film Independent when they ask me to do this, because I feel like my experience of getting to have this conversation with the first-time filmmaker nominees every year really charges my personal battery for telling stories and embracing, you know, different creative visions and being part of this process. So that may sound a bit corny, but I mean it, because otherwise, I mean, I make this is the thing I love to do. And I'm so proud of all of you, and I hope to get to meet all of you, maybe at the very crowded and really fun-loving Spirit Awards, which this year, in honor of a man I had respected and admired for decades, who is Josh Welsh, who is not with us anymore, but who was a brilliant, kind, incredibly supportive man in the film independent world and in the just world of making independent movies, period. So in that and on that note, we'll end. But I really thank you all for making the time, and thank you to Maria and the folks at Film Independent for inviting me. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
So
you
good
so
to be on a
much.
panel with you all. See you guys at the Spirit Awards.